She lived a life that most people pass by without noticing. Every morning, she woke before the sun, tied her hair back in the same careful way, and prepared for the day with calm, practiced movements. There was nothing about her that demanded attention. Her clothes were clean but old, chosen for comfort rather than style. She spoke softly and only when needed. To anyone watching, she was simply a quiet woman trying to live an ordinary life. She worked part-time at a small neighborhood place, doing simple tasks that did not require conversation. People often mistook her silence for shyness or lack of confidence. When others spoke loudly about their dreams and talents, she listened with a polite smile and said very little. No one ever asked her much about herself, and she never offered details. It was easier that way. Music had always been part of her days, but only in private. At home, she kept an old keyboard by the window. The keys were worn, and some were slightly yellow with age. Late at night, when the world grew quiet, she would sit there and play softly, careful not to disturb anyone. The music flowed from her hands naturally, like breathing, but no one outside those walls ever heard it. One afternoon, she decided to enroll in a community music program held at a local learning center. The program welcomed adults of all ages who wanted to learn or reconnect with music. There were flyers posted near bus stops and shops, promising friendly teachers and beginner lessons. She hesitated for days before signing up, reading the same flyer again and again. In the end, she told herself it was just for learning, nothing more. On the first day, she arrived early and sat near the back of the room. The space was bright, with upright pianos lined against the walls. Other students chatted icily, sharing stories about why they joined. Some spoke of childhood lessons they never finished. Others laughed about starting late in life. She listened quietly, hands folded in her lap, eyes moving across the room. When the teachers entered, they greeted everyone warmly and asked each person to introduce themselves and explain their experience. As the introductions went around, people spoke openly, sometimes proudly, sometimes nervously. When it was her turn, she simply said she had always liked music and wanted to learn more. Her voice was calm and steady. No one asked follow-up questions. From that moment, assumptions were made. The teachers noted her simple answer and modest posture. They placed her in the beginner group without hesitation. She nodded politely and followed instructions, never correcting anyone or asking for special consideration. To the teachers, she appeared exactly where she belonged. During the first lesson, students were asked to practice basic finger exercises. Some struggled, others laughed at their mistakes. She placed her fingers on the keys and moved through the exercise smoothly but slowly, matching the pace of the group. Her hands were relaxed, her posture correct without effort. One teacher briefly glanced her way but did not linger. As the days went on, she continued attending regularly. She arrived early, left quietly, and completed every task given to her. When lessons ended, she stayed behind sometimes, gently touching the keys, as if listening to something others could not hear. If someone walked by, she stopped immediately, stepping away as though she had done something wrong. Other students noticed her quiet nature but paid little attention beyond that. They were busy with their own progress, their own frustrations. To them, she was simply another beginner. Perhaps slower because she never showed off or spoke about improvement. No one realized that she was holding herself back on purpose. At home, her life followed the same simple pattern. After work, she prepared modest meals and cleaned carefully. The piano by the window waited for her every night. When she finally sat down to play, her entire presence changed. Her hands moved freely, confidently. The music was rich and deep, filled with emotion shaped by years of experience. She closed her eyes often, not to escape, but to remember. There was a time when music had been her whole world. Long hours of practice, strict discipline, and endless repetition had shaped her skill. She had once lived in spaces where music was taken seriously, where mistakes mattered, and excellence was expected. But life had pulled her away from that world, slowly and quietly, until music became something she carried inside rather than shared now. Sitting among beginners, she felt no anger or bitterness. She understood why people saw her the way they did. She had learned long ago that talent did not need to be announced. It could wait. One evening, during a group lesson, a teacher demonstrated a piece on the piano. It was short but expressive, meant to inspire students. As the music filled the room, she felt her fingers twitch slightly, reacting without thought. She quickly folded her hands together again. No one noticed, but her heart beat faster for a moment. After the lesson, the teacher asked if anyone wanted to try playing a few measures. Several students declined, nervous about making mistakes. She remained silent, eyes lowered. Eventually, the teacher moved on, assuming no one was ready. Outside the building, she paused before heading home. She listened to the distant sounds of traffic and voices, then looked back at the window of the classroom. Light spilled out softly, reflecting off the piano keys inside. She took a deep breath and walked away. Each day in the program followed a similar rhythm. Small exercises, gentle corrections, polite encouragement. The teachers meant well, but they never looked closely enough to see what lay beneath her calm surface. They spoke to her kindly but simply, as one would speak to someone with limited ability. She accepted it all without complaint. There was no need to explain herself. She was not there to prove anything, or so she told herself. Still, something stirred quietly within her each time she heard a difficult passage played or saw a complex piece mentioned. Her hands remembered things, her voice never spoke. And though she remained silent, the music inside her waited patiently, knowing that time had a way of revealing truth when least expected. The weeks passed quietly, and the routine of the music program settled into something familiar. The woman continued to arrive early, always choosing the same seat near the side of the room. She carried herself with calm, patience, never rushing, never drawing attention. To the teachers, she blended easily into the background, someone dependable but unremarkable. As lessons moved forward, the teachers began to separate students by progress. Those who showed quick improvement were given more challenging exercises, while others stayed with the basics. Without much discussion, she remained with the beginner group. No one asked if she felt ready for more. She did not ask either. During practice sessions, students often complained about sore fingers or confusion over notes. She listened quietly, offering a gentle smile when someone looked frustrated. When it was her turn to play simple scales, she did so carefully, never faster than required, never adding extra movement. Her playing sounded clean but plain, exactly what the teachers expected. One teacher, responsible for guiding the class, often spoke with confidence about judging talent early. They believed they could tell who had potential within minutes. To them, confidence showed through boldness, raised hands, and loud questions. Silence, they believed, meant uncertainty. So each time they looked at her calm expression and lowered eyes, they felt reassured in their judgment. Occasionally, a small detail escaped their notice. Her hands rested on the keys with ease, not stiffness. She rarely needed correction on posture or finger placement. When given feedback, she adjusted instantly, as if her body already knew what to do. Still, these moments passed quickly, unnoticed among louder mistakes made by others. One afternoon, the class was asked to observe while the teacher played a more advanced piece. It was meant to show what students might work toward in the future. The room filled with layered sounds and quick changes in rhythm. Some students looked overwhelmed, others impressed. The woman watched closely, her face calm, but her focus deep, as the final note faded. The teacher spoke about how difficult the piece was and how many years it usually took to play it well. They laughed lightly and said it was far beyond the class's level. A few students nodded, relieved. The woman said nothing, but something shifted inside her. Later that day, during a short break, the teachers spoke quietly among themselves. They discussed how some students seemed too confident without skill, while others lacked drive. One of them glanced briefly toward the woman and remarked that she seemed kind but slow, someone who might never move beyond the basics. The comment was not cruel, just careless. She was close enough to hear it. She did not react. Her expression stayed the same. She had heard similar words before in different places from different people. Long ago, those words had hurt. Now, they passed through her like distant noise. the teachers soon decided to introduce a challenge to the class. They believed struggle helped people learn their limits. So they chose a piano piece known for its difficulty, filled with fast passages and emotional depth. Their plan was to assign small parts of it to advanced students for observation, while using it as an example of how far beginners still had to go during class. One teacher mentioned that they would randomly ask someone to try a short section just to see how it felt. The room grew tense. Students exchanged nervous looks. No one volunteered. The teacher's eyes moved around the room and finally rested on the woman. Perhaps it was because she never complained. Perhaps it was because she looked calm. Or perhaps it was simply chance. With a polite tone, the teacher asked her to come forward and try a few measures. A soft murmur spread across the room. Some students looked surprised. Others felt relieved it was not them. The woman hesitated only for a second before standing. She walked to the piano with steady steps, her hands relaxed at her sides. The teacher explained that it was a difficult piece and that mistakes were expected. The words were meant to sound encouraging, but they carried a quiet assumption. This was an exercise, not a serious attempt. She nodded and sat at the piano bench. As she placed her hands near the keys, she took a slow breath. She did not begin right away. The teacher cleared their throat, ready to stop her at the first sign of struggle. But before she played, she deliberately adjusted her posture to match what beginners were taught. She reminded herself to hold back, to stay within the role given to her. When she finally pressed the keys, she played hesitantly, missing a note, then another. The teacher quickly stopped her, gently saying that the piece was too advanced and that it was fine not to try again. She apologized quietly, returned to her seat. A few students smiled kindly. The moment passed, and the class moved on. To everyone else, it confirmed what they already believed. Inside, however, she felt a familiar conflict. Part of her was relieved to remain unseen. Another part felt tired. Tired of shrinking, tired of pretending. She wondered why she was still doing it, why she kept stepping back when she knew she could step forward. That evening, she did not go straight home. She walked slowly through nearby streets, passing closed shops and quiet houses. Memories surfaced without warning. Practice rooms with cold floors. Long hours repeating the same passage until perfection. Applause that once felt loud and overwhelming. When she finally reached home, she sat at her piano and played the same difficult piece the teacher had shown. Her fingers moved without effort, filling the small room with sound far richer than the classroom had ever heard. The music rose and fell, carrying years of discipline and feeling. When she finished, the room felt still. She rested her hands in her lap and stared at the keys. She asked herself what she truly wanted. Not praise, not attention, just honesty. The next class came quickly. The teacher spoke again about the difficult piece, joking about how impossible it was for beginners. They decided that, at the end of the month, one student would be asked to attempt it fully as a lesson in understanding limits. They had already assumed who that student would be. Once again, their eyes drifted toward her. She noticed this time, and for the first time since joining the program, she did not look away. The day everyone had been quietly waiting for arrived without any special announcement. There were no posters, no reminders, no excitement in the air. It was just another class day on the surface. Yet something felt different to the woman from the moment she stepped into the room. The air felt heavier, as if the space itself was holding its breath. She arrived early as usual. The room was empty except for the piano standing silently along the walls. She chose her usual seat and placed her bag carefully at her feet. For a few minutes, she simply sat there, listening to the faint hum of the building. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers lightly touching, as if they were already preparing. Other students soon began to arrive. They talked about their week, about work, about how hard the lessons were getting. Some joked nervously about the difficult piece the teachers had mentioned before. Everyone knew someone would be asked to try it soon. No one wanted it to be them. The teachers entered with their usual calm smiles. They greeted the class and began the lesson as they always did, starting with warm-up exercises. The woman followed along, playing gently, keeping her movements small and controlled. She could feel the music beneath the surface waiting. After some time, one of the teachers cleared their throat and said it was time. The room grew quiet. They explained that the class needed to understand what advanced music truly demanded. This was not meant to embarrass anyone, they said. It was only to teach. Their eyes moved across the room and stopped on her. A few students shifted in their seats. Someone let out a small breath of relief. The teacher asked her to come forward and play the piece from the beginning. Not just a few measures this time, but the full section they had prepared. She stood slowly. For a moment, she felt every pair of eyes on her back as she walked toward the piano. Her steps were steady, but inside a quiet storm was building. She was tired of pretending, tired of hiding behind silence. Yet she was also afraid of what would come once the truth was out. She sat at the piano and adjusted the bench. The keys felt familiar beneath her fingers, more familiar than the room itself. The teacher placed the sheet music in front of her, though she barely looked at it. She had known this piece for years. The teacher reminded her to take her time and said again that mistakes were normal. Their tone was kind but certain. They were already prepared to stop her. She nodded once. Then she closed her eyes. The first note was soft, almost fragile. A few students leaned forward, expecting hesitation. But the next notes followed smoothly, and then the next. Her hands began to move with quiet confidence. Not rushed, not forced, just natural. Within seconds, the room changed. The music grew fuller, richer. Her fingers moved across the keys with precision that did not come from practice alone, but from memory and deep understanding. The rhythm was steady. The emotion was clear. Each note felt intentional. The teacher's hand, which had been ready to interrupt, slowly lowered. Students exchanged glances. Someone frowned slightly, trying to understand what they were hearing. This was not what struggle sounded like. She continued playing. Her posture straightened without effort. Her shoulders relaxed. It was as if the act of playing allowed her to finally become herself. The piano responded to her touch. Filling the room with sound that felt alive, the difficult passages arrived. The ones the teacher had warned were far beyond the class. She did not slow down. Her hands flowed through them smoothly, each movement controlled yet free. There was no sign of fear or doubt. The room was completely silent except for the music. One student covered their mouth in disbelief. Another sat perfectly still, afraid to move. Even those who knew little about music could feel something special unfolding. This was not just correct playing. It was expressive, emotional, real. The teachers stood frozen. Confusion crossed their faces, followed by shock. They glanced at each other, unsure whether to stop her or let her continue. Pride gave way to uncertainty. She played on. Memories moved through her as she played. Long nights of practice. Harsh corrections. Moments of failure that had shaped her strength. She did not play for the room. She played for herself, for the years she had kept quiet as the final section approached. The music grew softer, then stronger again, building toward a powerful ending. Her fingers struck the last chord with confidence and held it just long enough. Then silence. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The sound faded slowly, leaving the room feeling strangely empty without it. She opened her eyes and looked down at the keys. The teacher finally found their voice. They laughed softly, unsure, and said something about not expecting that. Another teacher stepped closer, staring at her hands as if they might explain everything. The students began to whisper. Some shook their heads. Others smiled in amazement. She stood quietly from the bench and turned toward the class. Her face showed no pride, no triumph, only calm. She apologized gently, thinking perhaps she had gone too far. One teacher quickly said there was no need to apologize. Their voice sounded different now, less certain, more respectful. They asked her where she had learned to play like that. She hesitated. The room waited. She simply said she had studied music many years ago. Nothing more. The teachers exchanged looks again. The assumptions they had carried so easily now felt heavy. One of them asked why she had joined the beginner program. She answered honestly, She said she just wanted to play again. No pressure. No expectations. No one laughed this time. The class ended shortly after, though no one remembered the remaining exercises. Students gathered their things slowly, still processing what they had witnessed. A few offered quiet words of praise as they passed her. She thanked them politely. Outside, the sky had begun to darken. She stepped out of the building and took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly now that the music had stopped. She did not know what would happen next. Behind her, through the window, the piano sat silently once more. But the truth it had revealed could not be taken back. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, and for the teachers watching from inside, the lesson they had planned for her had turned into one. They would never forget. The days after the performance felt different for everyone, but especially for her. When she returned to the music center the following week, the room no longer felt invisible. Conversations grew quieter when she entered. Some students smiled warmly. Others watched her with curiosity, unsure how to speak to her now. She took her usual seat, though it felt less hidden than before. She noticed the teachers watching her more closely, not with doubt this time, but with interest and a hint of regret. They spoke kindly, asking how she was, offering small smiles that had not been there before. The lesson began, but it did not follow the usual pattern. One of the teachers paused and addressed the class, saying that last week's moment had been unexpected and meaningful. They spoke about how everyone carries a story that is not always visible. Their words were careful, as if choosing them slowly. Then they turned to her and gently asked if she would be willing to share more about her background. The room grew quiet again, but this time it was a respectful silence. She felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She had not planned to speak about her past. For years it had lived quietly inside her, like a closed book. But now, surrounded by listening faces, she understood that silence no longer protected her. It only kept her distant. She took a breath and began. She spoke simply, without drama. She explained that music had been part of her life since childhood, that she had trained seriously for many years, spending long days practicing while others played outside. She spoke of strict teachers who demanded precision, of competitions that left her exhausted, stages that once felt like home. The students listened closely. Some leaned forward. Others sat perfectly still, afraid to interrupt. She explained how life had slowly changed. Family responsibilities had grown heavier. Money became uncertain. There were choices to make, and music, once her center, became something she had to set aside. She did not speak with bitterness, only honesty. She said that stepping away from music had been harder than she expected. At first, she thought it would be temporary. Weeks turned into years. The piano became something she visited in memory rather than reality. And when she finally returned, she no longer knew where she belonged. The teachers listened with lowered eyes. One of them nodded slowly, understanding now the gaps they had filled with assumptions. She explained why she joined the beginner class. She said she wanted to feel safe again. To play without pressure, to be a student without expectation. She did not want applause or attention. She just wanted to reconnect with the part of herself that had been quiet for too long. No one laughed. No one interrupted. After she finished speaking, the room remained silent for a moment. Then one of the teachers thanked her. Their voice sounded sincere, touched with humility. They admitted they had misjudged her, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. They spoke openly about how easy it is to measure people by what they show on the surface. How confidence is often mistaken for ability and silence for weakness. As they spoke, the weight of that realization settled over the room. Other students began to share their thoughts. One said the performance had inspired them. Another admitted they had been afraid of failing and now understood that fear differently. The moment became shared, no longer just about her. In the days that followed, the teachers adjusted the structure of the class. They offered her the option to move into a more advanced group. They also invited her to help guide some sessions, not as a teacher, but as someone with experience. She considered the offer carefully. Part of her felt honored. Another part hesitated. She was still learning how to stand in her truth without hiding or over-explaining. She agreed to stay, but on her own terms. She would play when asked. She would help when she could. But she would not turn the space into a stage. The teachers respected her decision. At home, her piano no longer felt like a secret. She played during the day sometimes, letting the sound fill the room openly. Neighbors heard music through the walls and paused to listen. She no longer stopped when she noticed. Memories still surfaced as she played, but they felt softer now, less heavy. She allowed herself to remember both the joy and the struggle without pushing either away. Back in class, students approached her with questions. How did she stay calm while playing? How did she handle mistakes? She answered honestly, saying that calm came from accepting imperfection, and mistakes were part of learning, not failure. The teachers watched these exchanges with quiet reflection. They saw how respect grew not from authority, but from understanding. They also saw their own role differently now. One afternoon, after most students had left, one teacher asked if they could speak with her privately. They apologized directly this time, not for assigning the piece, but for not seeing her sooner. She accepted the apology with grace. She said she understood. Life had taught her that people often see what they expect to see as she walked home that evening. The streetlights flickered on one by one. She felt lighter than she had in years. Not because she had been recognized, because she had stopped hiding. The music center no longer felt like a place where she needed to shrink herself. It felt like a place where honesty had room to breathe. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Her past no longer defined her silence. It gave meaning to her voice. Time continued to move forward as it always did. But something had shifted in quiet ways that could not be undone. The music center no longer felt like a place of lessons alone. It felt like a place of shared understanding. People arrived with lighter steps. Conversations felt more open. Even the walls seemed to hold a different kind of sound. She kept attending classes, not as someone above others, and not as someone hiding among them. She took her seat wherever there was space. Sometimes near the back, sometimes closer to the piano. The choice no longer mattered. What mattered was that she felt present. The teachers changed too, though they did not speak much about it. They asked more questions now. They listened longer before offering answers. When new students joined, they did not rush to label them. They remembered how wrong certainty could be. During lessons, she played more often. Not to impress, but to demonstrate feeling, patience, and care. When she played, the room did not tense the way it had before. It relaxed. Students listened not with fear, but with curiosity. They asked how music could sound both strong and gentle at the same time. She told them it came from living. From allowing joy and disappointment to shape the sound instead of fighting them. Some students struggled. Some improved quickly. Some doubted themselves. She never compared them. She reminded them that music was not a race. That progress looked different for everyone. One afternoon, the teachers organized a small gathering. Nothing formal. No stage lights. Just a chance for students to play for each other. Many were nervous. Some almost didn't come. She arrived early again, as she always did. This time, she stayed near the piano, helping others adjust the bench, offering quiet words of encouragement. When it was her turn to play, she chose a piece that was simple on the surface. Not fast, not dramatic. Just honest as she played, the room filled with warmth. There were no gasps this time, no shock, only stillness and attention. The music did not demand admiration. It invited connection. When she finished, there was gentle applause. She smiled, a real smile, not the polite one she used to carry. She felt no need to disappear afterward. Outside the music center, life continued as usual. People hurried to work. Cars passed. Seasons changed slowly. But inside her, something remained steady. At home, her days became fuller. She played the piano with the windows open now, letting sound drift outward. Sometimes, someone paused outside. Sometimes no one noticed. Both were fine. She began to write music again, something she had not done in years. Short pieces at first, quiet ones. Music that did not aim to impress but to remember. She wrote when she felt tired. She wrote when she felt hopeful. She let the notes be imperfect. There were moments when doubt returned, when old fears whispered that she had waited too long, that her best years were behind her. When that happened, she sat at the piano and played slowly, reminding herself why she began in the first place. Music had never been about being seen. It had been about being true. The teachers sometimes asked her for input when planning lessons, not because of her skill alone, but because of her understanding. She spoke honestly when something felt rushed or unfair. She praised gently when effort mattered more than outcome, one teacher admitted quietly one day that the experience had changed how they taught everywhere else too, that they listened differently now, even outside the classroom. She nodded, understanding that change often traveled further than we expected. Students came and went over time. Some stayed for months. Some moved on. Many carried something with them when they left. A little more patience, a little less fear. She watched them go with calm acceptance. She knew that paths crossed for reasons, even briefly. On a quiet evening, she sat alone at the piano, long after the sun had set. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp. She played softly, not for practice, not for memory, but simply because the music wanted to be heard. Her hands moved with ease, but also with care. She was no longer proving anything to herself or anyone else. She was simply living within the sound. She thought about the woman she had been when she first walked into the music center. Quiet, guarded, afraid of being misunderstood. She felt compassion for that version of herself. She wished she could tell her that silence was not a flaw, that waiting was not weakness. That truth had its own timing. But she also knew that the journey had been necessary, that every step, even the hidden ones, had led her here. The music faded gently as she lifted her hands from the keys. She sat there for a long moment, listening to the silence that followed. It no longer felt empty. In that silence, she felt whole. The world would continue to misunderstand people. Appearances would still deceive. Assumptions would still be made. But she carried something steady now, something no one could take from her. She had learned that being seen did not require being loud. That respect could grow from patience. That truth once revealed did not need to shout. And somewhere, in classrooms and quiet rooms and ordinary lives, the music would continue. Not always heard. Not always recognized, but always present.